My name is Gloria, and I'm 45 years old. For most of my adult life, I served as a police officer, wearing the badge with pride and believing I'd seen the worst humanity had to offer. When I retired 5 years ago, I promised myself I'd never again have to chase darkness, that I'd earned peace, quiet, and the sound of my garden wind chimes instead of sirens. But peace has a strange way of leaving just when you start to trust it. I never thought the next case I'd face would involve my own family. My daughter, Brielle, was 26, bright, sensitive, always smiling, the kind of woman who could find good in almost anyone. When she met Mason, I was happy for her. He seemed like a dream, tall, polite, ambitious, the kind of man any mother would feel relieved to see her daughter with. He had that easy charm, the kind that made everyone in a room feel like they mattered. I remember thinking, finally, she's found someone who treats her right. They married a year after meeting. The wedding was small, sweet, full of laughter. I stood beside Brielle as she recited her vows, watching her eyes light up when she looked at Mason. I told myself she was safe now, that this man would protect her, love her, give her everything she deserved. For a while, I believed that. Then the little things started changing. The first time I noticed, Brielle canceled one of our regular lunch dates because Mason needed her at home. The next time, she showed up but spent the whole meal glancing at her phone, nervous, replying to his messages. When I asked if something was wrong, she brushed it off with a shaky smile. "He's just a little overprotective," she said. "You know how men can be." I didn't press, though something about the word overprotective made me uneasy. I'd dealt with controlling men before, the kind who start by asking small favors and end by controlling your every breath. Still, I told myself maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I'd seen too much in my years on the force. Maybe I was projecting. But the mother in me couldn't ignore the signs. Her laughter changed. It wasn't that bright, free sound I used to love. It was smaller, quieter, forced. She started wearing long sleeves in the middle of summer and jumped whenever her phone buzzed. I remember the night everything changed. It was just after 11 p.m. when the phone rang. I was half asleep, the TV humming softly in the background. Brielle's name flashed on the screen. Her voice was trembling. "Mom," she whispered. "Can I come stay with you for a few days?" There was something in her tone that made my stomach drop. I didn't ask questions. I just said, "Of course, sweetheart, come home." She arrived early the next morning, wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy. Her suitcase was small, like she'd packed in a hurry. When she took off her glasses, I saw it. A faint bruise on her cheek, hidden beneath layers of makeup. My breath caught in my throat. "Brielle," I said softly. "What happened?" She tried to smile. "It's nothing, Mom. I just fell." The lie was weak, and we both knew it. I'd seen enough victims try to hide the truth behind the same excuse. I didn't push her then. I just wrapped my arms around her and held her until she stopped shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that bruise. The logical part of my mind tried to rationalize maybe it really was an accident. But my instincts, the ones honed by 20 years of police work, screamed otherwise. The next morning, I made breakfast, hoping food would coax her into talking. She sat across from me, silent, staring at her untouched plate. Finally, I said gently, "You know you can tell me anything, right?" Her eyes welled up, and for a second I thought she'd finally open up. But she just nodded and whispered, "I know, Mom," before standing and leaving the table. I watched her go, my heart twisting. I wanted to protect her, but I knew she needed to come to me on her own terms. Still, as I washed the dishes, my mind began piecing things together: the sudden distance, the fear in her eyes, the bruise. It didn't take much to realize what kind of man Mason really was. I sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at the photo of their wedding on the counter. They looked so happy that day, so perfect. But now, that smile on his face felt sinister, like a mask hiding something rotten underneath. I had dealt with men like Mason before. Men who used charm as a weapon, control as a game, and fear as their shield. But never had I imagined one of them would end up married to my daughter. That evening, when Brielle went to bed, I sat in the living room alone. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily, filling the silence. I looked around my house, the home that had always been my sanctuary, and realized it had just become a battlefield. I thought I'd left the badge behind for good, that my fighting days were over. But as I sat there, watching the moonlight filter through the curtains, something inside me shifted. And in that moment, I swore that the man who hurt my child would learn exactly who he was dealing with. Brielle refused to talk at first. The morning after she arrived, I found her sitting on the porch, wrapped in one of my old quilts, staring out at the garden without saying a word. The air was heavy with silence, the kind that only comes when someone is fighting an invisible war inside themselves. I brought her coffee and sat beside her. I didn't push. I just waited. She traced the rim of her mug with trembling fingers. "I don't know how to start," she whispered finally. "Start anywhere," I said softly. "You're safe here." Her eyes welled up, and before she spoke another word, she began to cry deep, shuddering sobs that came from someplace far beyond the surface. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders and held her as the years of strength she'd built around herself began to fall away. When she could finally breathe again, she began to tell me everything. It started small. She said Mason would criticize her clothes, telling her certain dresses were too revealing or not classy enough. At first, she thought he was just being protective. Then he started questioning her friends, suggesting they were bad influences. Slowly, she stopped seeing them altogether. "He said he just wanted us to focus on each other," she said, wiping her tears. "He said marriage was about being a team." I thought that sounded romantic. I could hear the self-blame in her voice, the guilt that every survivor carries. I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, but I stayed quiet, letting her speak. The control grew worse. Mason began monitoring her social media, demanding her passwords so we can be transparent. He started checking her phone and tracking her location. She laughed nervously when she told me that part, but there was no humor behind it. "He even knew when I stopped for gas," she said. "If I didn't answer his texts right away, he'd call me over and over until I picked up." My hands tightened around my mug. I had seen this pattern too many times, the manipulation, the erosion of independence disguised as love. Then came the first shove. They were arguing about dinner, of all things. He wanted her to make a meal she didn't know how to cook. When she suggested takeout, he snapped and pushed her against the counter. He apologized right after, claiming it was a moment of weakness. He cried. He swore it would never happen again, and she believed him. As she spoke, I could see the shame on her face, as if she was confessing a sin instead of exposing a crime. "I thought he just needed help," she said. "He told me I make him angry sometimes. That if I just listened, he wouldn't lose control." That sentence broke something inside me. I'd heard variations of it from countless women, and I'd seen how believing it destroyed them piece by piece. I reached over and took her hand. "Brielle," I said, my voice steady, "you didn't make him do anything. He did that because he's weak, because he wanted control." She looked at me, searching my face for doubt. When she found none, she let out a small breath, the first sign of relief since she'd arrived. But her story wasn't over. A few weeks before she left him, she'd found hidden cameras in the house, tiny ones, placed near the living room and bedroom. Mason claimed they were for security, but she realized he was watching her, monitoring when she left, when she returned, when she texted anyone. When she confronted him, he flew into a rage. He threw a plate, breaking it near her feet, and told her if she ever tried to leave, he'd make sure she regretted it. That was the night she called me. I felt my pulse pounding as she spoke, a familiar fire rising in my chest, the same feeling I'd had on the job every time I met a predator who hid behind charm. I had spent years locking up men like Mason. But this one was in my own family. "I didn't want to tell you," Brielle said quietly. "I didn't want you to see me like this." I squeezed her hand. "Sweetheart, you're not weak. You did the hardest thing, you left." She nodded, but her eyes were still full of fear. "What if he comes after me?" I looked out toward the street. My instincts had already shifted into motion. "Then he'll regret it." That evening, after she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with her phone and started scrolling through her messages. My stomach turned as I read Mason's texts alternating between fake affection and threats. You'll come home when I say you will. No one will believe you. You'll ruin your life if you try to leave. I'm not done with you, Brielle. Each message was a knife, twisting deeper, but I kept reading. I saved screenshots, forwarded them to a secure drive, and began a folder labeled Insurance. I knew emotions alone wouldn't protect her. The law required evidence, and I was going to build a case that would hold up even if Mason tried to slither his way out. As I closed the folder, I stared at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. The woman staring back wasn't just a mother anymore. She was something else, something that had been asleep for too long. It was time to stop being just a mother and start being the woman who knew how to handle men like Mason. I knew emotions weren't enough. I needed proof. My years on the force had taught me that anger doesn't win cases, evidence does. Without it, Mason could twist the story, play the victim, and make Brielle doubt herself all over again. That wasn't going to happen on my watch. After Brielle went to bed, I quietly slipped into my home office and turned on my old laptop. I hadn't used it for much since retiring, but the skills came back like muscle memory. I started by organizing every piece of digital evidence I could gather: screenshots of his texts, timestamps from her phone calls, photos of the bruises she'd tried to hide. Every file was labeled and backed up in 3 different places. I wasn't taking any chances. The next morning, I asked Brielle to give me her old phone, the one Mason had forced her to stop using when he bought her a shared one. She hesitated at first, afraid of reopening old wounds, but eventually handed it over. He used to text me from his work number, she said quietly. Sometimes he'd even call from different phones so I couldn't block him. I spent hours combing through the messages. The manipulation was sickening, compliments followed by cruel jabs, apologies followed by threats. I recognized the cycle instantly: control, punishment, guilt, repeat. One message caught my eye. "Remember what I said about that money? You don't touch it unless I tell you to." That led me to check her bank statements. Mason had transferred nearly all of Brielle's savings into his account for management. He was cutting her off financially, one deposit at a time. I printed the records and added them to the file. By noon, I had enough evidence to paint a clear picture of who Mason really was: a manipulative, controlling abuser hiding behind a clean suit and a perfect smile. But I wasn't done yet. I opened my old police contacts list and found a name I hadn't spoken to in years: Detective Carla Nguyen. She and I had worked dozens of domestic cases together. I sent her a message asking if she could meet. Within minutes, she replied, "Of course. You okay?" When we met at a small cafe downtown, Carla took one look at my face and knew this was personal. I explained everything, from Brielle's bruises to the hidden cameras Mason had installed. She didn't interrupt once, just listened, her expression darkening with every detail. "Do you want me to open a file?" she asked finally. "Not yet," I said. "I want to be sure he can't wiggle out of this. I want every piece lined up before we move." Carla nodded. "Then let's get to work." That afternoon, she ran Mason's name through the system. What we found made my stomach turn. He had a record, not convictions, but incidents. A restraining order filed by a previous girlfriend 5 years earlier, later dropped. 2 complaints from coworkers about aggressive behavior. A lawsuit involving fraud that had been quietly settled. He wasn't just abusive, he was strategic. The type of man who knew how to manipulate not only women but the system itself. I'd seen that breed before. They wore charm like armor. When I got home, Brielle was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. I sat beside her and gently took her hand. "Sweetheart," I said. "I found out some things about Mason." Her eyes widened. "Like what?" I hesitated, then showed her the documents and screenshots I'd printed. Her face went pale as she flipped through the pages. He lied about everything," she whispered. "He told me that restraining order was fake. He said his ex was crazy." "That's what they all say," I said quietly. But the truth doesn't lie. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time, I saw anger behind them instead of fear. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we make sure he never hurts you again." That night, I sat in my bedroom, the old weight of a badge I no longer wore pressing on my mind. I opened the trunk at the foot of my bed, the one that held relics of another life. Photos, case notes, and my uniform. My fingers brushed the edge of my old service belt, and a wave of memories came flooding back. I thought of all the women I'd helped protect. I thought of the nights I'd come home exhausted but satisfied, knowing I'd made a difference. And now, here I was, about to fight the same fight all over again, but this time, it was personal. I realized something important that night. Justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears the face of a mother who's had enough. I packed everything neatly into a file folder, sealed it, and labeled it Mason, for the record. As I did, a calm, familiar focus settled over me, the same one I used to feel before every major arrest. Tomorrow I would start watching him. If Mason thought he could hide behind his lies, he was in for a rude awakening. And to make him truly understand the consequences, I needed to confront him face to face. I opened the old storage trunk in my closet and saw my police uniform neatly folded inside. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and old coffee, a scent that carried decades of memories, report forms, long stakeouts, adrenaline, and the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. For years that uniform had been a part of me. I had left it behind when I retired, telling myself I'd earned the right to hang up the badge and live a quieter life. Now, standing in my hallway with the trunk lid open, I felt something stir that I hadn't felt in a long time. A cold, focused certainty that this was no longer just about evidence or courtrooms. This was personal. This was Brielle. I lifted the folded shirt with hands that remembered how to move with purpose and care. The badge still fit snugly on its pin. Putting it near my heart felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't known I needed. I buttoned the shirt slowly, the fabric whispering against my skin, and with each button I felt the old authority return, less theatrical than it used to be and more like the right thing to wear into a fight. My boots, once polished for patrol, had a thin dusting from the closet floor. I pulled them on, the leather creaking as if waking from a long sleep. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked like the woman I'd been on my best days. Not invincible, but steady and dangerous in the way that comes from experience rather than anger. I didn't tell Brielle at first. She was fragile, and she needed time to believe she was safe again before I dragged her into another kind of storm. Instead, I packed a small kit into a nondescript tote. My old body camera still functional. A pocket voice recorder, a compact flashlight, spare batteries, and a tiny pin camera I'd used years ago for undercover work, disguised as costume jewelry for a civilian observer role. I placed the pin camera in the lining of a scarf I knew Mason had given Brielle on their first anniversary, so it would look like I'd accepted a trinket instead of planting surveillance. The plan wasn't to entrap out of malice. It was to collect the undeniable facts that would keep Brielle safe and, if necessary, take Mason down. I called Detective Carla Nguyen and told her I was planning to be more visible. Her silence over the line told me she understood the stakes. "Be careful," she said finally. But there was no lecture in her voice, only the professional respect between women who'd seen the same kinds of monsters and survived to tell about them. I checked my service pistol, the one I kept locked in a safe at home. I told myself I wouldn't carry it into anything unless lives were at stake. The law still mattered to me, and I had no desire to become judge, jury, and executioner. What I intended to do was simpler and more precise. Step into the role where Mason least expected resistance and force him into a position where his own words and actions would undo him. I practiced my approach in the living room like an old habit, how I'd enter a room with purpose, how I'd let my voice be steady and unafraid, how I'd use presence to dismantle a bully's confidence. It felt odd to rehearse in my kitchen, but muscle memory is an old friend. Brielle noticed the uniform when I walked into the kitchen later that afternoon. Her face blanched, then softened with something like relief. "Gloria?" she said, voice small. "You didn't have to do that." I sat across from her and placed my hand over hers. "I didn't put it on to scare you," I said. "I put it on so he knows this mother won't be walked over." She nodded but didn't ask for details. She trusted me in the way daughters trust mothers who have stood between them and danger before. That night I left the uniform on the chair by the door and slept with the house lights dimmed but the phone within arm's reach. When I closed my eyes, The uniform's weight settled over me like an old promise. I would use everything I knew to protect my child. The next morning, I rehearsed my story, calm, concerned mother checking in for Brielle's welfare so I could go into Mason's orbit without tipping my hand. I would be measured, not vengeful, methodical, not reckless. The goal was exposure, not escalation. I made calls to a few people I trusted quietly. A private security consultant friend who could check vehicles, an IT specialist who could trace emails and hidden cameras, and Carla, who agreed to be ready to act if things turned. Each person I called tightened my safety net a degree more. As I buttoned the shirt one last time, the badge gleamed like a promise. I had no illusions that a uniform alone would change the world, but it explained to anyone who underestimated me that I was not just an offended mother. I was someone who knew how to read a room, how to collect proof, and how to see a plan through. I left the house that morning carrying my tote and a calm that felt both old and new. I wasn't going to charge in with guns blazing. I was going to be visible, lawful, and relentless. But when I showed up at his office the next morning, I realized Mason was even more dangerous than I'd thought. Mason's face turned pale when he saw me walk into his workplace wearing my uniform. I stayed in the doorway long enough to let the moment register, let him swallow whatever rehearsed charm he thought would protect him. The lobby smelled of cheap cologne and lemon cleaner. The receptionists glanced up, curious, then looked away when they recognized me. I walked past polished glass and potted plants with a measured step, the old rhythm of authority reminding me how to hold myself so a bully feels exposed. He stood by the large conference window, phone in hand, the suit he wore fitted and expensive. Up close, though, the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Hartley," he managed, too smoothly. "What brings you here?" I kept my voice even and ordinary, like a neighbor checking in. "I wanted to talk about Brielle. I'm concerned." He laughed, the kind of laugh that pretends at casual while rattled underneath. "Everything's fine. You worry too much." I sat on the visitor couch as if I belonged there, the body cam discreet beneath my scarf. I let him go on about work, about stress, about how Brielle had been overly dramatic lately. His answers were slick and practiced, the kind of lies that slide into polite conversation and hope no one pulls at the seam. When I mentioned the bruise, his smile flickered. He deflected with a joke that landed thinly and then narrowed his eyes like a predator testing a cornered animal. "You don't know what goes on in our marriage," he said, too quietly for the receptionist to hear. "Stay out of it." I let the recorder run and let him think he'd shut me down. I leaned forward and said, softly, "I used to arrest men for that kind of talk." The color left his face a little more. He tried to reclaim control by talking about trust and misunderstandings, then switched to subtle guilt how I was overreacting and making things worse for Brielle. I played the part I'd perfected over decades, the reasonable mother with a worried tone. It worked. He grew impatient, angry even, and the edges of his composure frayed. He called Brielle's concerns attention-seeking and suggested she was trying to sabotage his reputation at work. Each time he spoke, my recorder caught the half-truths and the venom behind them. A manager walked by and gave me a curious look. I smiled, the kind that says I belong to civility, and the manager kept walking. That little theater of normalcy mattered, abusers rely on it. He began to lean in, voice low and threatening. "If you keep spreading," he started. I interrupted, calm as a courtroom. "I'm not spreading anything. I'm asking questions that a mother has a right to ask." He bristled, and in that split second his mask slipped. He stepped closer, and his hand struck my arm not hard, but with intention. "Don't drag my family through the mud," he hissed. The receptionist pretended not to see, the fluorescent lights humming as if nothing unusual had happened. My wrist stung where his fingers had closed. I looked at him without flinching. "You just touched me," I said. His jaw clenched, embarrassment and anger battling. "You see?" he whispered later. "You've made him defensive." My recorder had the whole exchange. I let him think he'd rattled me when really I'd confirmed everything I needed. I stood up, smoothing my shirt, and said, "I'm going to leave now. But understand this. If Brielle wants to press charges, I will help her. And I won't be the only one backing her." He scoffed and spat something under his breath as I walked out. The glass doors slid closed behind me and I felt the old rush, part adrenaline, part righteous fury. I glanced in the reflective surface and saw his face watching me until I was a dot in the parking lot. I started my car and eased into traffic, keeping my movements casual. Halfway down the block, I noticed a dark sedan pull out behind me. It matched the way Mason's jaw had tightened, a shadow pretending to be accidental. I altered my route through side streets, checking my rear view and side mirrors with a practiced calm. The car stayed. I felt the hairs lift along my arms. I knew then that his anger wasn't empty words. He wanted to intimidate me, to send a message. I punched my phone and called Detective Carla Nguyen, whispering the license plate number I'd been able to glimpse. She listened, then said, "Get somewhere public and don't go home." I drove slower, watching the black car hug my taillights like a bad omen. But as I left the building, I noticed a black car following me. Mason wasn't done playing games. The realization hit me: Mason had sent someone to follow me. It wasn't paranoia. I'd been in enough surveillance situations to know the difference between coincidence and intent. The black sedan trailed me for 12 minutes through 3 separate turns, never overtaking, never backing off. Whoever was driving knew what they were doing, staying far enough to avoid suspicion but close enough to remind me I was being watched. I made a right into a grocery store parking lot, one with multiple exits, and parked near the entrance. Then I waited. The sedan drove past, slowed, circled once, and pulled into a space 3 rows behind me. I pretended to check my phone, lifting it slightly to angle the screen's reflection. Through the dark tint, I caught the faint outline of a man in the driver's seat, head lowered like he was pretending to scroll. Old instincts kicked in. I turned on my dashcam before starting the engine again. I took a detour through a residential area, weaving through side streets, watching to see if the car followed. It did every turn, every lane change. By the time I merged onto the main road, I had 5 minutes of footage, more than enough to identify the license plate. When I finally pulled into the police precinct parking lot, the sedan sped off. Coward. I watched it disappear around the corner before shutting off the dashcam and exhaling for the first time in what felt like hours. My pulse was steady, but beneath the calm was anger, a deep, burning kind that comes from being underestimated. I called Carla right away. She met me outside, her brow furrowed. "You sure it was him?" "I don't think Mason would do his own dirty work this soon," I said. "But he's definitely behind it. He's trying to scare me." Carla took down the license plate number and promised to have it checked through the system. "Gloria, you need to stay careful. If he's escalating, it means he feels the pressure." I nodded. I knew that pattern too well. Abusers always double down when they start losing control. That night, Brielle and I ate dinner in silence. She kept glancing at the window, asking if I was okay. I told her I was fine, but my body was tense, scanning every sound. Around midnight, when she went to bed, I walked through the house, checking the locks, the curtains, every door frame. It was the kind of hyper-awareness I hadn't felt since my patrol days. At 1 a.m., I found it. A folded piece of paper slipped under the front door. No envelope, just red ink scrawled across the top. "Stay out of his marriage." My hand tightened on the note until the paper crinkled. I turned on every light in the house and checked the perimeter again. Nothing, no footsteps, no car engine, just the steady hum of crickets outside. I locked the door, scanned the yard one last time, and took a photo of the note for evidence. By morning, my exhaustion was buried under cold determination. I called Carla again, forwarded her the photo, and told her to file it under harassment. She promised to keep it quiet until we had enough to connect it directly to Mason. Later that day, I found Brielle sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. Her face was pale. "Mom," she said quietly, "he's been texting me again. New number." I took the phone. The messages were short, sharp, meant to unnerve her. "You can't hide forever. You think your mother can save you?" "I always find what's mine." Every one of them oozed ownership and control. I told her to block the number, then took screenshots before she did. I could feel her trembling, so I wrapped my arms around her. "He's not going to win, sweetheart," I said softly. He's trying to scare us, but he's already losing control. That's what men like him do when they know they've been caught. I didn't tell her about the note or the car that followed me. I didn't want her to feel hunted too. My job was to carry that weight for now. That afternoon, Carla called again. "We ran the plates," she said. "Registered to a rental company. Guess who rented it last week? Mason." "Yup, under his company's name. He's being clever, but not clever enough." I thanked her and hung up, my anger shifting into strategy. Instead, he'd just handed me proof of stalking, harassment, and intent to harm. Still, I knew what came next. Men like Mason don't stop when confronted. They escalate until they think they've regained control. I had to move before he did. I spent the evening laying out the evidence I'd collected so far: texts, recordings, photos, the dashcam footage, the note. Each piece was a brick in the wall, closing in around him. I just needed one final push, one moment that exposed him completely. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made my body tense. At one point, I swore I saw headlights slow near the window, but when I peeked through the blinds, there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of the streetlights. The fear didn't scare me anymore. It only sharpened me. I'd faced worse in alleys and crime scenes, but this time, the battlefield was my home. I poured a cup of black coffee and sat by the window until dawn broke. I promised myself that before the week was over, Mason would know exactly what it felt like to be watched, cornered, and powerless. We agreed to set up a trap, one that would force Mason to reveal his true nature. I decided to lure Mason into a false sense of control. If there's one thing I learned in my years as an officer, it's that men like him can't resist an opportunity to prove they're still in charge. So, I gave him exactly what he wanted: an illusion. I started by sending him a carefully worded message from a new number, one he wouldn't immediately recognize. I told him I just wanted to make peace for Brielle's sake. I wrote that I didn't want any more drama, and that I was willing to talk privately, just the two of us. Every word was calculated soft, conciliatory, deferential. The kind of message an intimidated mother might send. He replied, within minutes. "Finally. Maybe now you're ready to talk sense." That told me everything I needed to know. Mason still thought he had power. That would be his downfall. I set the meeting for the next evening at my house. I made sure. Brielle was away. Carla had arranged a safe house for her under another name. I wanted no chance of her being anywhere near him. Then I began to prepare. The cameras were hidden in plain sight, one disguised as a photo frame on the mantel, another tucked into the corner of a bookshelf. My voice recorder was clipped under the coffee table, and the body cam sat comfortably against my chest beneath my sweater. Every angle, every sound, would be documented. By the time the doorbell rang, I had rehearsed my tone and posture a dozen times. Calm, steady, just enough vulnerability to bait him into dropping his act. When I opened the door, Mason greeted me with that familiar smug grin. "Mrs. Hartley," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Glad to see you came to your senses." "Please," I said softly, gesturing to the couch. "Let's just talk." He sat, sprawling like he owned the place, his knee bouncing impatiently. I stayed opposite him, notebook in hand, as if I was the one taking notes for reconciliation. "So," he began, "Brielle's been confused lately. You know how emotional she can get." I tilted my head, letting him ramble. He spoke in circles, painting himself as the victim, claiming that Brielle had a tendency to overreact, and that I was feeding her paranoia. "I only want what's best for her," I said gently. "But she's been so scared. You must understand how that looks to me," he smirked. "Scared? Of what?" "I've never laid a hand on her that she didn't deserve." I felt my pulse spike, but I didn't let it show. I simply nodded, feigning sympathy. "Marriage can be complicated." He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Exactly. Finally, someone who gets it. She needs structure, guidance. Without me, she'd fall apart." The words poured out of him like poison. My recorder captured every sentence, every incriminating syllable. When he paused to take a sip of water, I studied him, quietly. His arrogance was his weakness. It blinded him to the fact that every sound in that room would destroy him. I just need to know one thing, I said finally. Do you ever regret how you treated her? He barked a laugh. Regret? She pushed me. She needed to learn respect. Maybe now that she's alone, she'll realize how much she needs me. I took a slow breath, lowering my voice. You think she'll come back? Oh, she will, he said confidently. She can't make it without me, you'll see. He sat back, satisfied, as if he'd just won some invisible argument. I gave him a small smile, one that hid the triumph bubbling beneath my calm expression. Then he made a mistake. He stood up and began to wander around my living room, glancing at the photos on the wall. You were a cop, right? He asked, voice dipping into something colder. Guess you think you can scare me. I don't need to scare you, I said. I just want you to stop contacting Brielle. He turned, smirking. That's when the mask shattered completely. He stepped closer, towering over me. You think you can take her away from me? You think your badge means anything now? You're retired, Gloria. You're nothing. The venom in his voice was almost tangible. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. His face was flushed with anger, the pretense of charm gone. I spoke slowly, enunciating each word. You should leave before you say something you can't take back. But he didn't. He leaned in closer, eyes burning. You have no idea what I can do. Every second was recorded, his threats, his tone, his aggression. My fingers itched to reach for the phone on the table, but I kept my composure. Finally, I stood. We're done here. He laughed, sharp, mean, and ugly. Me. You and your ungrateful daughter. He turned to leave, muttering curses under his breath. My body cam light blinked faintly, still recording. I followed him to the door, watching him disappear into the night, his car engine revving angrily as he sped away. I stood there for a moment, the cool air against my face, trying to steady the mix of rage and relief surging through me. I had what I needed, proof that Mason wasn't just abusive, but dangerous. Yet something deep in my gut whispered that he wasn't finished. But before I could end the meeting, Mason did something that turned my plan into something far more dangerous. Mason grabbed my wrist and tried to intimidate me. His fingers dug into my skin, the pressure sharp enough to leave a bruise. For a moment, the world went still, the ticking clock. The hum of the refrigerator, even my breath. He leaned closer, eyes dark and burning with the kind of fury that thrives on fear. I didn't give him what he wanted. Let go, I said evenly. He didn't. His grip tightened, testing me, waiting for me to flinch. You think you can threaten me? He hissed. You don't know who you're dealing with. I met his gaze, steady and unyielding. Actually, I said quietly, I do. The confidence in my tone threw him off balance for a second. He blinked, confusion flickering in his eyes. I used that split second to pull back, freeing my wrist and taking a single step out of his reach. My training came back in a flash: maintain distance, control the tone, de-escalate if possible. But I could see it in his face. He wasn't looking to de-escalate anything, he wanted power. Everything you've done tonight, I said slowly, is on record. His jaw clenched. You're bluffing. I shook my head, lifting my chin slightly toward the tiny blinking light on my scarf. Smile for the camera. For a moment, Mason froze. Then the color drained from his face as the reality sank in. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but no words came out. You set me up, he spat finally. No, I said, my voice calm. You set yourself up. His expression twisted into something between fury and disbelief. He took a step toward me but stopped when I raised a hand. Don't, I warned. Leave now, Mason. You've already said enough. He sneered, trying to recover his arrogance. You think a recording will change anything? I can spin this. I can tell them you provoked me. You and Brielle both. Try, I said quietly. We'll see who they believe when the evidence rolls out. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw twitching, then let out a bitter laugh. "You're just like her," he said, voice dripping with contempt. "Always trying to control everything." "Control?" I said softly. "No, I just don't let monsters hide behind excuses." He moved toward the door, muttering under his breath, his body trembling with rage. For a second, I thought he'd hit something or someone, but instead, he slammed the door open so hard it rattled on its hinges. I didn't move until I heard his car tires screech down the street. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding. My wrist throbbed where he'd grabbed me. The skin was already reddening. When I looked down, I realized my hands were steady. I'd faced worse before, but this time the victory felt different, personal, protective, maternal. I'd looked into the eyes of the man who had terrorized my daughter and watched him flinch. But relief was a luxury I couldn't afford yet. I went straight to the living room, locked the door, and pulled out my phone. I called Carla. "It's done," I said. "What happened?" "He threatened me, got physical. It's all recorded." Carla's voice sharpened. "You need to bring that footage in right now. I'll meet you at the station." "I will," I said. "But I want Brielle out of sight first. He's angry, and I don't trust him not to do something stupid." Carla agreed. "I'll send a patrol to watch the safe house just in case." When I hung up, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I went to my desk, downloaded the recordings from every device, and backed them up twice, one copy on a flash drive, another on a cloud server under an encrypted folder. I'd done this too many times in my career not to know how evidence could conveniently disappear. As I worked, Brielle came out of the bedroom, rubbing her eyes. "Mom, what's going on?" I looked at her and hesitated for a moment before rolling up my sleeve. The bruise on my wrist was already turning purple. Her face went white. "He did that?" she whispered. I nodded. "But it's okay, honey. I got it all on tape." She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "Stop," I interrupted gently. "None of this is your fault. The only one who should be sorry is him." She nodded, trembling, and I held her until she stopped shaking. Then I looked her in the eyes and said, "This ends tonight." By the next morning, I'd handed everything over to Carla, the recordings, the threats, the texts, the video of him grabbing me. She promised to file the report under domestic violence and stalking. Mason wouldn't be able to charm his way out this time. Still, there was one thing neither of us anticipated. That evening, Carla called again. Her tone was grim. "We went to his place," she said. "He's gone." "Gone," I repeated. "Packed a bag. Took his laptop. His car's missing. Looks like he bolted after your meeting." I looked out my window, heart pounding. The street was quiet, but it felt wrong too still, like the air before a storm. "Don't worry," Carla said quickly. "We've put out an alert, he can't get far." But my instincts didn't agree. Mason was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. If he'd fled, it wasn't because he was scared. It was because he was planning something. That night, I barely slept. I moved between the window and the door, checking locks, scanning shadows. My gut twisted with the certainty that this wasn't over. But before the police could act, Mason disappeared and the nightmare wasn't over. The next morning, Mason was gone. Completely, utterly gone, like a shadow erased by sunlight. Carla's team had checked his house at dawn. Drawers were open, clothes missing, the closet half empty. His car was nowhere to be found. The neighbors said they'd seen headlights leaving around 3 a.m., but no one could say where he went. For a man so obsessed with control, his disappearance was calculated, not panic, but planning. When Carla called to confirm, I felt a strange combination of relief and dread. Relief that he wasn't at our doorstep. Dread because men like Mason don't run. They retreat, regroup, and retaliate. After hanging up, I went straight to Brielle. She was still in the small apartment the department had rented for her under an assumed name. She opened the door cautiously, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. "He's gone," I told her. Her shoulders sagged, but she didn't smile. "Gone where?" "I don't know yet. But I'll find out." She hesitated. then whispered, "What if he's watching us?" That thought had already crossed my mind more times than I wanted to admit. I scanned the street outside her building. A parked car sat across from us, but it was empty. The quiet felt loaded. "You stay here," I said. "Lock the door. I'll keep you updated." That afternoon, I sat in my car outside Mason's workplace, watching through binoculars. His office door was closed, blinds drawn. I'd expected him to reach out to someone, maybe a coworker, maybe a friend, but there was no movement, no activity. The man had vanished like smoke. Then, as the hours passed, a new worry crept in. What if Mason had taken something important? Something he could use against Brielle? That evening, I drove to their old house, the one she'd fled from. The key she'd given me still worked. The place was eerily quiet. I moved through the rooms slowly, the air thick with the faint scent of his cologne. I checked the bedroom first, drawers pulled open, hangers empty. Then I moved into the office. The laptop was gone. My stomach twisted. On the desk, an empty space where Brielle's laptop used to sit stared back at me like a missing tooth. Mason had taken it. And with it her photos, emails, documents, her life. "Damn it," I muttered under my breath. I checked the shelves, rifled through the drawers, searching for anything he might have left behind. Receipts, mail, notes, anything that might hint at where he went. That's when I found a crumpled envelope under the desk. Inside were several printed photos, private ones, intimate shots of Brielle, clearly taken without her knowing. My blood ran cold. He'd kept these as trophies, evidence of his control. I called Carla immediately. "He's taken her laptop," I said. "And I just found photos." Carla swore under her breath. "We'll issue a warrant and get cyber involved. If he tries to use those online, we'll trace him." "Do it fast," I said. "He's not just running. He's planning something." When I left the house, the street was dark. The kind of dark that hums with tension. I slid into my car and started the engine. That's when I noticed it, a faint blinking light on my dashboard. It wasn't there before. I leaned closer. It was a tracking device, tucked neatly beneath the steering column. For a second, my mind went blank. Then instinct took over. I pulled over, snapped a photo, and carefully detached the device using a pocket knife. Mason wasn't just gone, he was watching. He'd planted this before he disappeared, to see where I went. I drove straight to the precinct, handed the tracker to Carla, and filled out another report. She promised to have it analyzed for fingerprints. By the time I got home, it was almost midnight. I poured a cup of cold coffee and sat at the table, staring at the wall. Every nerve in my body screamed that he was somewhere nearby, watching and waiting. The next morning confirmed it. When I stepped outside to grab the newspaper, I found another message waiting for me. This time, it wasn't just a note. It was a flash drive taped to my front gate. No name, no handwriting, just a single word written in permanent marker: play. I brought it inside, slipped it into an old laptop, and held my breath. The video opened with static, then cleared. The camera angle was from a distance. Grainy but unmistakable, it was my driveway. The footage showed me walking to my car the previous morning. Mason's voice played over the video, calm and taunting. "You can't hide behind that badge forever, Gloria. You think you've won, but you haven't even started to lose yet." My blood ran cold. The timestamp on the footage was from less than 24 hours earlier. He'd been close enough to film me, close enough to leave the flash drive himself. I called Carla again, voice steady but urgent. "He's watching me. He was here yesterday," she cursed quietly. "We'll step up patrols around your house. Don't go anywhere alone." But I already knew patrol cars wouldn't be enough. Mason was escalating, and I understood what that meant. When control-driven men lose their grip, they don't surrender, they destroy. I sat by the window long after sunset, the flash drive still in my hand. Mason's words replayed in my mind, over and over, until they became a promise I intended to break. And I realized the next confrontation wouldn't happen on my terms, it would happen on his. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of glass breaking. It was sharp, violent, and close to be coming from outside. For a split second, my body froze the way it always used to just before a raid. Then the training took over. I reached for the weapon I kept locked in my nightstand and moved quietly toward the sound. The house was dark, except for the faint glow from the street lamp outside. My bare feet made no noise on the wooden floor. I passed Brielle's old room empty, thank God, and edged toward the kitchen. My breath was slow, controlled, the way I'd taught rookies to do when adrenaline threatened to drown their judgment. When I reached the kitchen, I saw the jagged outline of the broken window above the sink. Cold air drifted through, carrying the metallic tang of shattered glass. The floor sparkled faintly with shards catching the moonlight. I stepped carefully around them and noticed something else. A small red envelope sitting neatly on the counter. The same red ink as before. The same slanted handwriting. My pulse quickened. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The front read simply, "For you." Inside was a single photograph. It was Brielle sitting on the couch at her safe apartment, watching TV. The picture had been taken from outside the window. I didn't realize I was shaking until the photo slipped slightly in my fingers. My stomach dropped. Mason knew where she was. He'd been close enough to take this picture. I sat at the kitchen table, the gun beside me. The photo spread out like a confession. I stared at it for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. My mind began running in patterns: how he found her, how long he'd been tracking us, what he was planning next. I knew what this was. He wasn't hiding anymore. This was escalation. Pure and simple, a predator tightening the circle around his prey. By sunrise, I had already driven to the precinct. Carla was waiting in her office, hair pulled back, expression grim. I slid the photo and the envelope across her desk. "He knows where she is," I said, flatly. Carla picked up the photo, studying it. "That's from outside her window?" "Yes?" She muttered a curse under her breath. "We'll relocate her. I'll call the department now. He's taunting you, Gloria." "That's his mistake," I replied. I spent the rest of the day making arrangements. Brielle was moved to another safe house, this one in a different district, under tighter surveillance. She cried when I told her, terrified and exhausted. "He's not going to stop, is he?" she asked. "He will," I said, gripping her shoulders. "Because I'm going to make him." After she left, I returned home. The silence was heavy, almost claustrophobic. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside sounded like footsteps. I checked the locks again, then pulled out the file I'd been building. It was thick now: texts, photos, recordings, the flash drive, the note, and now the photo of Brielle, a complete profile of a man unraveling. But something about the last 48 hours kept gnawing at me. How had Mason known where she was? The apartment's address was confidential, shared only between Carla, myself, and the housing coordinator. He must have been tracking either me or her phone again. I checked both. My devices were clean. I even took apart my phone case and searched the car again, no new trackers. That's when the realization hit. The photo hadn't been taken through the front window, it had been shot from an angle too high for a pedestrian. I opened the image file again on my computer, zooming in on the faint reflection in the glass. There it was, the outline of another building. He'd taken the photo from across the street. I called Carla immediately. "Check the tenants in the building opposite Brielle's first safe house," I said. "Top floor." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You think he rented there?" "I think he lived there for weeks." That evening, I drove past the neighborhood, taking the long way around to avoid drawing attention. From a block away, I could see the apartment window where Brielle used to stay, and directly across from it, a narrow brick building with 3 stories. On the top floor, the curtains were open. I lifted my binoculars. Through the glass, I could see the faint outline of a tripod. My heart pounded. By the time Carla arrived with a small team, the unit was empty. No personal items, no clothes, no electronics. But tucked under the tripod was a USB drive taped to the stand. Carla slid it into a plastic evidence bag and said, "We'll analyze it." When she played it later, we found footage of Brielle and me, dozens of clips stitched together, silent but intimate. Some from the safe house, others from my home, Mason had been everywhere, recording everything, watching our every move. I felt my throat tighten as the screen flickered. At the end of the footage, there was a short message, Mason's voice, smooth, calm, mocking. "You think you can hide her from me, Gloria? You forget I'm always watching, always 2 steps ahead." Carla turned to me, her jaw set. "He's not just trying to scare you anymore, he's building up to something." I stared at the paused frame of his face on the monitor, that smug smirk burned into the screen. "Then we stop him before he gets the chance." Carla nodded. "We'll need to set a trap. But this time, we'll control every piece of it." I looked down at the photo of Brielle, still clutched in my hand. My decision was instant. Use me as bait. Carla's head snapped up. "Gloria. You know it's the only way," I said. "He's fixated on me now. He wants me scared. We give him what he wants, but on our terms." Carla hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "All right. But we do this by the book. No improvising." "I don't improvise," I said. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't true. He wanted a game, but now he was playing by my rules. I met Sada just a indication. Detective Nguyen early the next morning at the precinct. She was already waiting for me in the back conference room, a pile of files and a fresh cup of black coffee in front of her. Her face said everything. This wasn't just another case for her anymore. It was personal now, too. Mason had made it that way. "We have enough to issue a warrant," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "But he's smart. He's avoiding his cards, using burner phones, cash rentals. He's moving like someone who's planned this before." I nodded, not surprised. "He's not running, he's circling. He wants me to know he's still in control." "Exactly," Carla said. "So we use that." The idea had been forming in my mind all night, 1 part instinct, 1 part revenge, all built on discipline. Mason believed he was smarter than me. That arrogance would be his undoing. "I'll reach out to him," I said. Carla frowned. "That's risky." "He expects it," I replied. "He wants to see me flinch, so we'll give him a show." After a long pause, she nodded. "Okay. But you don't go in alone. We'll set up surveillance, backup, everything. You stay within the parameters." I smiled faintly. "I know the rules, detective." We spent the next several hours planning. I would send Mason a message, something that would sound like surrender, something to lure him out of hiding. We decided to use a disposable number and have the trace ready as soon as he responded. The location would be isolated enough to stage a sting, but public enough to keep it safe. Carla suggested an abandoned rest stop off Highway 7, an old trucker's pit stop that had been closed for years. No working security cameras, minimal traffic, and enough space for her team to position themselves unseen. It was perfect. I typed the message slowly, making sure every word felt desperate but believable. "Mason, I don't want to fight anymore. You win. Let's talk alone, please. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. You know where to find me." I showed it to Carla before sending it. She nodded. "He'll bite." We waited. For 6 long hours, nothing. No response. The silence stretched until my nerves hummed like a live wire. Then, just after midnight, my phone buzzed. "Be there. Alone." No name, no punctuation. But the words were unmistakably his. I looked up at Carla, who was watching the message come through the trace system. "Got him," she said quietly. "He's moving again." The next day crawled by. I tried to rest, but my mind kept replaying every possible outcome, every angle, every misstep that could turn fatal. I hadn't felt that sharp edge of tension since my early patrol days. Only this time, the stakes were higher. This wasn't about a suspect or a case. This was about my daughter's safety and my own. When dusk came, I dressed simply: dark jeans, jacket, boots. The body cam was hidden beneath my collar, the audio recorder clipped beneath my sleeve. I carried no weapon this time. Carla insisted on it. "We can't risk a confrontation turning lethal," she'd said. I pulled into the old rest stop 15 minutes early. The place was as empty as memory: rusted gas pumps, cracked pavement, a faded sign swinging in the wind. The silence was unnerving. Carla's voice came through my earpiece, calm and precise. "We have eyes on all angles. If he so much as twitches wrong, we're there." "Copy that," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Headlights appeared on the horizon, a black car approaching fast. My pulse quickened. I could already feel that familiar pressure in my chest, the one that came before everything changed. The car slowed, pulled up about 20 feet away, and stopped. Mason stepped out, dressed in dark clothes, hands in his pockets. Even from here, I could see the arrogance in the way he moved. He walked toward me, grinning faintly. "Didn't think you'd actually show," he said. "I told you," I said, my voice low. "I'm done running." He laughed softly. "Running? I'm not the one hiding behind cops and cameras." "I'm not hiding behind anyone," I replied. "You're the one who disappeared." He shrugged. "Had to make you miss me." His calmness was chilling. I noticed the faint bulge in his jacket pocket, a phone. Maybe something else. I kept my posture relaxed, letting him believe I wasn't a threat. "Why are you doing this?" I asked quietly. "What do you want, Mason?" He tilted his head, smiling that same cruel smile. "I just wanted to see the look on your face when you realized you couldn't stop me." I didn't move, didn't blink. "And what then? What happens after this little performance?" He stepped closer. Too close, lowering his voice. "Then maybe Brielle learns what happens when people cross me. Maybe you do too." That was it. The confession. The threat. Carla's voice came through my earpiece, sharp and controlled. "We got it. Hold position." Mason glanced toward the trees suddenly, suspicion flashing across his face. "You didn't come alone, did you?" I exhaled slowly, meeting his eyes. I did. He didn't believe me. Reaching toward his jacket. "Now," Carla ordered. The floodlights snapped. Mason froze as 5 officers emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn, voices commanding him to freeze. He stumbled, panic breaking through his smug facade. "Wait, what is this? You set me up." I stood where I was, calm, composed. "No, Mason," I said quietly. "You set yourself up." He lunged, trying to run back toward his car. But 2 officers intercepted him. The struggle was short. Within seconds, his hands were cuffed, his body pressed against the hood of his car. Carla approached, reciting his rights in a voice as steady as stone. I watched, arms folded, as the man who had terrorized my daughter was reduced to nothing more than a criminal being booked for his own arrogance. For a moment, it was over. The air felt lighter, almost breathable again. Then, as the officers led him to the patrol car, Mason twisted his head toward me. His eyes were wild, desperate, and full of hate. "This isn't over," he shouted. "You hear me? It's not over." His voice echoed into the night until the door slammed shut and the car drove away. Carla turned to me, exhaling hard. "You did good, Gloria." I nodded, but the chill in my bones wouldn't leave. His last words clung to me like smoke. I knew Mason too well to think those were empty threats. And when he shouted those words, I felt it deep down, this fight wasn't finished yet. Mason stepped out of his car with a smug grin, holding Brielle's stolen laptop. It glimmered faintly under the floodlights, the symbol of every piece of control he had left. His wrists were cuffed, but that didn't stop the arrogance. He looked at me like he still owned the room, even with officers surrounding him. "You should have stayed out of it, Gloria," he said, voice dripping with venom. "You didn't have to drag your daughter into this." I stood a few feet away, my body calm but coiled. My badge glinting faintly against the collar of my jacket. "You dragged her into this the moment you put your hands on her," I replied. He laughed low and bitter. "You really think you've won, don't you? That you've destroyed me? I'm smarter than you think." Carla signaled the officers to search him while keeping her weapon trained, just in case. They found a second phone, a knife, and a small flash drive hidden in his jacket pocket. The evidence was piling up faster than his smirk could fade. "Take him in," Carla ordered, her tone clipped and professional. But Mason wasn't done. He twisted in the officer's grip, his voice growing louder. "You can't stop me. You think she's safe? You think the cops will always protect her?" His eyes locked on me, burning with hate. "You can't watch her forever, Gloria. One day, I'll walk free. And she'll still be mine." I stepped closer until we were only a few feet apart. I didn't flinch. "You'll never touch her again," I said quietly. "Not now. Not ever." For a second, I thought he might lunge. His body tensed, his jaw clenched. But the officers pulled him back before he could take a step. They shoved him into the back of the patrol car, his face pressed against the window. Even through the glass, he kept his eyes on me, smiling like a man who thought he still had the upper hand. Carla turned to me as the car drove off, her brow furrowed. "You did the right thing. It's over." But my gut told me it wasn't. The kind of darkness Mason carried doesn't disappear with a pair of handcuffs. It festers. I followed Carla back to the station to give my statement. They booked Mason on multiple charges: harassment, stalking, assault, and possession of illegal surveillance material. Every piece of evidence we'd collected fit together like a puzzle, and it was airtight. Still, I stayed until the paperwork was signed, my nerves refusing to settle. Around 2 a.m. Carla walked me to the parking lot. The air was cool, the night quiet except for the hum of the city in the distance. "You should get some rest," she said. "We've got him. He's not going anywhere." I nodded but didn't move toward my car. Instead, I looked back at the precinct windows, at the silhouette of Mason being led into a holding cell. His confidence hadn't cracked. Even now, he looked like a man who thought he was untouchable. That image haunted me on the drive home. The headlights blurred against the windshield as I tried to shake the sound of his voice. "You can't watch her forever." When I got home, I sat in the dark living room and replayed the body cam footage. I wanted to see every detail again to make sure nothing had been missed. That's when I noticed it. A glint in Mason's hand right before they cuffed him. Not the laptop, something smaller. A key. I paused the footage, zoomed in. The resolution wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to make my stomach twist. It was a locker key. I called Carla immediately. "He's hiding something. Look at the footage his right hand before they cuffed him. That key wasn't logged in the evidence report." She checked within minutes and called me back, her tone tight. "You're right, it wasn't turned in. We'll go through his belongings again." 2 hours later, she called again. "We found it. It's for a storage unit." A storage unit. Whatever was inside, Mason had made sure to protect it to the very end. Carla and her team got a warrant and went to the location that same afternoon. I insisted on coming. She argued at first, but eventually agreed it was my daughter's safety on the line. After all, the storage facility sat at the edge of town, tucked between two warehouses. Rows of corrugated metal doors stretched into the distance. When the manager led us to Mason's unit, I felt that familiar coldness in my chest, the prelude to something awful. Carla cut the lock. The door screeched open, revealing rows of boxes, electronics, and photo equipment. I stepped inside cautiously. The air was stale, heavy with dust. We found multiple cameras, labeled drives and folders, each one marked with names and dates. Women's names. Not just Brielle's, at least a dozen others. Carla opened one of the boxes, her expression hardening as she flipped through photos. "He's been doing this for years," she muttered. Every image, every file told the same story. Mason's pattern of control, his obsession, his cruelty. Brielle wasn't his first victim, just the first one who had someone like me to fight back. As the officers cataloged everything, I found a small black notebook wedged behind one of the boxes. Mason's handwriting covered every page, detailed notes about his relationships, tracking habits, passwords, even observations about Brielle's routine. Carla took it from me gently, her jaw tightening. "We've got him now." "Really got him?" I nodded, but my throat felt dry. The magnitude of it hit me all at once. It wasn't just about Brielle anymore. Mason had destroyed other lives before hers. When we left the unit, the sun was rising, casting a pale light across the parking lot. I felt drained, hollow, but also strangely resolute. This wasn't just vengeance anymore. It was justice for my daughter, and for every woman Mason had ever hurt. Carla turned to me. You know what this means, right? This won't just be a local case. This is going federal. I looked back at the row of storage units, thinking of the women whose faces I'd just seen. Good, I said quietly. Let the world finally see what he really is. That morning, as they led Mason into federal custody, he turned and glared at me through the transport van window, and in that moment, I saw it clearly. The true face of evil. This isn't over, he'd yelled, and for a while, it wasn't. Those words clung to me like a stain I couldn't wash out. Even after Mason was charged and locked up pending trial, I still double-checked every window, every lock, every shadow that lingered a little too long outside my house. I'd seen too many predators slip through loopholes, twist their charm into sympathy, and walk away free. I refused to let Mason be one of them. The trial began 6 months later. By then, Brielle was stronger, her voice steadier, her shoulders no longer slumped with shame. Still, when we walked into the courthouse that first day, her hand gripped mine like she was bracing against a storm. I squeezed back, silently promising that I wasn't going anywhere. The courtroom was packed reporters, advocates, even a few of Mason's former co-workers. His crimes had spread beyond whispers now. They'd become headlines. Ex-executive arrested in multi-state harassment investigation. The public loved a scandal, but for us, this wasn't a story. It was our life. Mason looked different when they brought him in, thinner, pale, the smugness dimmed but not extinguished. Even in shackles, he carried himself with that same infuriating air of superiority, the kind that had once convinced Brielle to trust him. When the judge entered, the room quieted. The prosecution began laying out the evidence piece by piece, the threatening messages, the hidden cameras, the videos, and the files from his storage unit. Each new revelation drew audible gasps from the gallery. I sat behind Brielle, the back of her chair within reach, grounding myself in the rhythm of her breathing. The body cam footage played next, my confrontation with Mason, his threats, his confession. Watching it again made my stomach twist, but it also reminded me why we were there. Mason's attorney tried everything, claimed the recordings were manipulated, that Brielle was unstable, that I had a personal vendetta. He even painted Mason as a misunderstood man with emotional issues. But the evidence was undeniable. The forensic analysts traced the footage on the flash drives directly to his cameras. The files had timestamps matching his movements, and his fingerprints were all over the equipment. His pattern of abuse was as clear as daylight. Then came the moment I'd both dreaded and anticipated. Brielle's testimony. She took the stand looking fragile but resolute. When she started to speak, her voice trembled, but with each word, she grew stronger. She told the court about the isolation, the fear, the nights she cried herself to sleep, wondering what she'd done wrong. She talked about the first shove, the first threat, the first time she realized she wasn't safe in her own home. When the defense tried to rattle her, she didn't break. She held her head high and said, "I'm not ashamed anymore. He wanted me to feel small. I'm not small." Tears blurred my vision as I watched her. My daughter, my sweet, quiet Brielle, was no longer a victim. She was testifying against her abuser with the strength of a survivor. Mason glared at her the entire time, his jaw tight, his knuckles white. At one point, he muttered something under his breath, earning a warning from the bailiff. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I knew that look. That same dark rage that used to terrify Brielle now looked powerless under the fluorescent courtroom lights. When it was my turn to testify, I told the truth, the entire truth. I explained my background in law enforcement, the moment I realized my daughter was being abused, and the evidence I'd collected. I didn't hide my anger or my fear. I told the jury that I wasn't speaking as a cop, but as a mother. The badge doesn't make me who I am, I said, meeting their eyes. What makes me who I am is knowing when someone I love is in danger and refusing to look the other way. The room was silent when I stepped down. Even Mason's lawyer didn't meet my gaze. After 3 long weeks of testimony, cross-examinations, and exhibits, the jury was dismissed to deliberate. Those hours stretched longer than any shift I'd ever worked. Brielle and I sat together in the courthouse hallway, not speaking, just waiting. Every tick of the clock felt like a heartbeat we didn't own. When the doors finally opened, the air in the courtroom was electric. The jury foreman stood, holding the paper that would decide everything. On the charges of aggravated assault, harassment, stalking, and unlawful surveillance, the foreman read, "We find the defendant guilty on all counts." The words crashed through me like thunder. Brielle gasped, covering her mouth with her hands as tears streamed down her face. I reached for her, pulling her into my arms, and for the first time in years, she truly let go. Mason didn't flinch at first. He just sat there, staring straight ahead, the muscles in his jaw working like gears grinding to a stop. Then he turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were flat, cold, burning with a hatred that almost felt empty. The judge's gavel struck the desk, echoing through the room. "Sentenced to 12 years without parole," she declared. As the deputies escorted him out, he leaned toward us and whispered something I could barely hear, 2 words that chilled me all over again. Still watching. I didn't react. I refused to give him that satisfaction. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters shouted, microphones thrust forward. But none of that mattered. Brielle and I just stood on the steps, holding on to each other while the noise faded into nothing. Justice had finally caught up to Mason. Yet, even as the relief washed over me, a small part of me couldn't forget the last look he'd given us, like a man who'd lost the battle but still believed the war wasn't over. Yet even in victory, I couldn't shake the memory of what we'd been through or the fear of what comes after justice is served. It's been 6 months since Mason's conviction, and life has slowly started to heal. The first few weeks after the trial felt surreal, like coming up for air after being underwater too long. The silence in the house no longer carried the weight of fear. It was stillness now. Peace. Every morning, I wake up to the sound of birds instead of the anxious thoughts that used to rattle in my head. Brielle lives across town now, in a cozy apartment filled with sunlight and plants. The first time I visited, I noticed she'd hung bright curtains, something Mason never allowed. It made me tear up. It wasn't just decoration. It was a declaration of freedom. She's been seeing a therapist regularly. The sessions have helped her piece herself back together, one truth at a time. There are still moments when she flinches at sudden noises or checks the locks twice before bed, but the difference is she's living again. Laughing again. We talk every day. Sometimes we discuss simple things like recipes or weekend plans. Other times, she'll ask about the past, about what I saw, how I knew, how I stayed so calm. I always tell her the truth. I didn't. I just couldn't afford to break. One evening, she came over for dinner. The smell of rosemary chicken filled the kitchen while she set the table, humming softly. I caught myself watching her, realizing how much strength she'd gained. "Mom," she said suddenly, looking up. "How did you do it? How did you not lose yourself through all of this?" I thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. Because I remembered who I was before he came into our lives. I remembered the woman who wore that uniform and promised to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. She looked over at the old trunk sitting in the corner of the living room, the same one that held my uniform all those months. "Nico, do you ever miss it?" she asked. I nodded. "Sometimes. But not in the way you think. I don't miss the job. I miss the purpose." That night, after she left, I opened the trunk again. The uniform was still there, neatly folded. The badge gleamed faintly in the dim light. I ran my fingers over it and felt something stir, not grief, not nostalgia, but gratitude. That uniform had helped me save my daughter. It had reminded me who I really was when the world tried to make me forget. The news followed Mason's imprisonment closely for a while. His case became a talking point on domestic abuse panels, crime documentaries, and podcasts. The public loved dissecting monsters once they were behind bars. I didn't listen to any of it. I didn't need to. I'd seen the real thing up close. According to Carla, Mason had been quiet in prison, no incidents, no appeals, no communication attempts. I should have felt comforted by that. But part of me knew silence didn't mean peace. Men like him thrive on attention. Being ignored is their worst punishment. That, more than the sentence itself, was his true prison. Still, I couldn't shake the image of him glaring at me through the transport van window on the day of sentencing. There had been something in his eyes, not rage anymore, but defeat. For once, I think he understood what it felt like to be powerless. To make sure his victims would never be forgotten, Carla and I started a foundation in Brielle's name, the Hartley Project. It offers legal resources, emergency housing, and counseling for survivors of domestic violence. Brielle threw herself into it completely. She handles outreach, speaks at events, and tells her story not as a tragedy but as a lesson in survival. At our first event, I watched her stand before a room full of women, some bruised, some trembling, all listening. Her voice was clear and steady. "You're not crazy. You're not weak," she said. "You're someone who trusted the wrong person, and now you get to trust yourself again." The applause that followed felt like redemption. After the event, she hugged me, tears in her eyes. "We're really doing it, Mom," she whispered. "We're turning everything he did into something good." And she was right. Mason's cruelty had forged something powerful: resilience, empathy, purpose. He'd tried to destroy us, but instead, he built a legacy of strength neither of us could have imagined. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on the porch and think about everything that's happened. The wind moves through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain, and for the first time in years, I feel at peace. I don't look over my shoulder anymore. I don't jump at sounds. I've reclaimed my quiet. Every so often, Carla calls with updates, parole hearings, case closures, new survivors we've helped. She still calls me Officer Hartley, half joking, half respectful. I always laugh. "I'm retired," I remind her. But deep down, I know that part of me will never really retire. Because the uniform wasn't just fabric, it was a promise. And I've learned that promises don't fade. They just change shape. Brielle is thriving now. She's taking classes in social work, planning to specialize in trauma recovery. She told me she wants to help other women find their voices the way she found hers. Watching her rebuild her life from the ashes of what he did has been the greatest victory of all. As for Mason, he's still in prison, still forgotten. No visitors, no letters, no spotlight. Just the sound of doors closing every night on a man who once thought he was untouchable. And that, I realized, was the lesson he'd never forget. Because no one, not even a son-in-law, gets away with hurting my daughter.